My fingers went numb first. The trowel slipped from my hand, landing softly in the soil beside the hydrangeas I'd spent 40 years nurturing. Then the pain hit sharp and sudden, like a shotgun blast to the chest. It radiated down my arm in jagged pulses. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a strangled whisper escaped. And in that terrifying silence, as my knees gave way and I collapsed face first into my garden, one cruel truth surfaced. I'd spent 72 years caring for everyone else, and now I was dying alone, surrounded only by the plants I'd tended better than my own heart. My name is Claire Winters. I've lived in a modest colonial house nestled in rural Vermont for over 4 decades. It's the home my late husband Henry and I bought when our daughter Patricia was barely a teenager. After he passed, this garden, the soil, the roots, the endless tending became my sanctuary, my therapy, my silent companion through grief, loneliness, and the endless pull of obligation. That morning started like any other. I had woken up early to trim back the roses and water the hydrangeas before the summer sun got too hot. I'd barely gotten through half of it when the pain hit. It was like nothing I'd ever felt. Not a pinch or a pang, but a searing, unforgiving fire tearing through my chest and left arm. My vision blurred. The sunlight suddenly felt too bright, too hot. My legs folded underneath me and I dropped, cheek pressing into the cool earth like a lifeline. And as I lay there, struggling to breathe, a thought pushed through the pain, clear and cutting. I've poured my soul into this family, cooked, cleaned, sacrificed, showed up, always, for Patricia, for Timothy, my grandson, for Henry, even after he was gone. Yet when I needed someone, really needed someone, there was no one, not a hand to hold, not a voice to soothe, just the birds, the breeze, and the quiet betrayal of being forgotten. The ambulance came. I remember Flash's hands lifting me onto a stretcher, a young paramedic's face hovering above mine, the wail of sirens that sounded far too distant. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and the faint smell of antiseptic. A steady hum filled the room, but inside me was a silence far heavier than the one in my garden. This wasn't just a heart attack. It was an awakening, because in that moment, lying there alone, chest aching and tubes snaking from my veins, I finally understood something no one had ever dared say aloud. Family roots, they can be the shallowest of all. I was still in the hospital when Patricia showed up. She sat stiffly in the corner of my dimly lit room, her designer purse perched on her lap like a shield. At 53, she looked more like me than I wanted to admit. Same tired eyes, same fine worry lines etched deep from years of carrying burdens no one else noticed. "Mom," she said softly, rising to stand near my bed. "Are you awake?" I nodded faintly. My chest still felt like someone had parked a truck on it, and my throat was raw from the oxygen mask. I managed to croak one word: water. She held a cup to my lips and tilted it gently, helping me drink. The tenderness in her touch startled me. Patricia wasn't cruel, just distant, polite, dutiful. She didn't hug often. She didn't call unless there was a reason. But here she was, helping me sip water as if she cared. "You had a heart attack," she said after a pause. "A moderate one. The doctor said you're lucky. Lucky." That word sat wrong in my mouth. Lucky would have been not having a heart attack at all. Lucky would have been someone noticing I was in pain before I hit the ground. She glanced at her phone. "Timothy found you." In the garden, Timothy, my grandson, 26, tall and broad like his grandfather. Henry, but with none of Henry's steadiness. He'd been between jobs more often than I could count, still lived with roommates, borrowed money like it grew on trees, and showed up only when he needed something. And yet he was the reason I was still breathing. The door opened, and in walked a woman with kind eyes and silver strands weaving through her dark hair. "Mrs. Winters," she greeted, glancing at my chart. "I'm Dr. Sharma." She explained the procedures in a calm, practiced tone: a stent, medications, cardiac rehab. I would recover, she said, if I took care and had support at home. She turned to Patricia. She'll need help, medication management, rides to rehab, light daily assistance. Patricia nodded. Of course, Robert and I will take care of everything. Robert, my son-in-law, a man who knew how to golf, schmooze, and avoid every kind of responsibility known to man. In 28 years of marriage to Patricia, he had perfected the art of doing nothing while looking like he was doing everything. And Timothy can help too, Patricia added. His schedule is flexible right now. That was one way to put it. I nodded and smiled the way I'd always smiled graciously, gratefully, because what else could I say that I didn't trust them, that I'd rather have a stranger tend to me than rely on people who thought of me as a chore. After she left, I stared at the ceiling and tried to count the holes in the tiles just to keep my mind from spinning. The next evening, Timothy showed up. He slouched in the chair beside my bed, reeking faintly of weed masked by cheap cologne. He stared at his phone more than he looked at me. "So, you'll be okay." "Right." "Gran," he asked, eyes flicking up just long enough to register I was still alive. I nodded. "The doctor thinks so." "Cool, cool." He scrolled again. "Mom said you'll need help when you get home. I can totally do that." He said it like he was offering to water a neighbor's plant, not like he was talking about someone who had just almost died. "That's very kind," I said, because I'd spent 72 years stuffing down my real feelings with polite responses. "You've always helped me out." "Right," he said, flashing that boyish grin he used to use when he was 15 and needed a ride or cash. We sat in silence until a nurse came in. He used that moment to mumble, "Gotta run," and left. Promised to come the next day. Didn't show for 3. Dr. Sharma came back on the 4th day with my discharge papers. "You're doing well enough to go home," she said, "provided you have support in place." I nodded, even smiled, and lied. "Yes, my daughter's made arrangements." She handed me a stack of prescriptions. "You'll need to start these medications immediately. No driving, no lifting anything over 5 pounds. Rehab 3 times a week." My head swam. I felt like I was being released into a world I no longer knew how to navigate. "Is your family picking you up today?" she asked. "Yes," I said again. Another lie. I called Patricia. No answer. Called Robert's office. Left a message. Texted Timothy. Silence. Finally, an hour before discharge, I reached him. "Oh, today," he said, groggy. "Mom didn't say anything. I'm telling you now. I need to be picked up at 2:00. That's kind of soon. My car's acting up, and I promised Chad I'd help him move some stuff. Timothy, I had a heart attack." Long pause. Okay, I'll try to borrow Mom's car." He showed up at 3:45. I'd been sitting in a wheelchair in the discharge area for nearly 2 hours, waiting. He pulled up in Patricia's BMW, clearly high, fumbling with the radio as I climbed in. The nurse frowned. "Is someone staying with you?" "My grandson," I replied, not looking at him. He drove too fast, one hand on the wheel, the other on his phone, rambling about a girl he liked, a job he might get, a roommate who was being a jerk. When we got to my house, the garden looked wilted and sad. The flowers I'd tended so lovingly were drooping from neglect. Inside, Timothy dropped my bag in the foyer. You need anything, I should probably return Mom's car. I need my prescriptions filled. I said, the pharmacy's on your way. He groaned. I was going to meet up with some friends. The doctor said I need to start them today. Fine. I need money. Of course he did. I handed him my Medicare card and $60 in cash. He left. Promised to come back. Didn't. That night, I sat in my recliner. I couldn't climb the stairs. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't taken my meds. I waited, alone, and for the first time in my life, I realized something that felt both devastating and liberating. Obligation is not love, and just because someone shares your blood doesn't mean they'll be there when it counts. I didn't sleep that first night home. How could I? I sat upright in my recliner, afraid to move. The stairs felt like Everest, and my chest still ached from the strain of trying to do everything myself. I hadn't taken my heart medication because it wasn't there. Timothy never came back. The quiet of the house, once comforting, now felt like a weight pressing down on me, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but hollow. I stared at the clock, minute after minute, wondering how someone who claimed to love me could leave me like this. At 9 the next morning, the door finally creaked open. Timothy, unshaven, smelling of stale beer. He shuffled into the room and tossed a pharmacy bag onto the coffee table. Sorry, Gran. Got tied up with some stuff. I opened the bag, fingers trembling. The receipt showed he'd filled the prescriptions less than 15 minutes earlier. I'd gone 12 hours without the medication that was supposed to keep me from having another heart attack. I didn't say anything at first. I was too tired, too defeated. You hungry? I asked instead. Starving, he said, flopping down on my couch like he lived there. Got any eggs? I blinked at him. I'd been in the hospital for 4 days. I didn't know what was in my fridge. I could barely stand long enough to shower, let alone cook. I'll check. He mumbled, but didn't move. Just grabbed the remote and started flipping through my TV channels. I took my meds and leaned back, the exhaustion seeping into my bones, the kind that makes your soul feel heavier than your body. Timothy, I said finally, we need to talk about the next few weeks. He didn't look at me. What do you mean I'll need help? Daily tasks, rides to appointments, groceries. Oh, yeah, sure. He said it like I'd asked him to walk the dog. I'd compensate you, of course. Now he looked up. His whole face changed, like a switch had flipped. Really cool. How much I gave him a figure, more than fair. He nodded quickly. Yeah, I can do that. And just like that, we weren't family anymore. We were a transaction. The next few days blurred into a routine. Timothy showed up late, always late. Sometimes after I'd already called him 3 or 4 times. He took me to rehab, but never came inside, just sat in the car with the music blaring. He brought me fast food when I asked for groceries. He left dishes in the sink, empty soda cans on the counter. Patricia called once. How's it going with Timothy helping out? Fine. I lied. Good. Robert and I are just slammed right now. This charity gala is eating all my time, and Robert's up for partner this year. He's barely home. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't ask if I needed anything. She didn't offer to come by. 1 week passed. Then one morning, Timothy didn't show up at all. He was supposed to take me to rehab at 10:00. I called, texted, no response. At 12:30, the rehab center called. We just wanted to check on you, Mrs. Winters. We missed you today. I told them I wasn't feeling well. Another lie. I didn't want to explain that I'd been sitting by the window for 2 hours, waiting on a ride that never came. Timothy finally showed up at 4:00. Sorry. Gran. Overslept. I stared at him. These appointments are critical. Timothy, it's not like missing one is the end of the world, he said, dropping onto the couch. I'm not your chauffeur. No, I said quietly. You're my grandson. I thought that meant something. He rolled his eyes. Don't start with the guilt trip. Mom already called and tore me a new one. So Patricia knew. She knew he hadn't come, and she still didn't call me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Timothy, I said, I need my medication refilled. It was ready yesterday. He groaned. I was going to go after I met some friends. I took my last dose this morning. Fine, he said, holding out his hand. I'll need your card. This time, I gave him my credit card instead of cash. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and stared out at the garden. The bird feeders were empty. Weeds were climbing through my flower beds. My hydrangeas were drooping, thirsty and forgotten. It hit me then how perfectly it all mirrored my life. Unwatered, unnoticed, uncared for. A knock at the door startled me. It was Martha Wilson, 3 houses down, 70-something, straight as a ruler, holding a casserole dish. I've been meaning to stop by, she said. You look terrible. Claire, I almost laughed. Leave it to Martha to skip the sugarcoating. I had a heart attack. I said, I know. News travels fast. She handed me the dish. Chicken and rice. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep better than whatever that grandson of yours might bring. I stepped aside, letting her in. And just like that, she took over. She filled the kettle for tea, noticed the empty bird feeders, asked about the garden, asked if my family was helping. They're trying, I said. She gave me a look. Trying isn't the same as doing, she muttered, setting 2 mugs on the table. She told me about her own son, how he'd promised to check in after her husband died, promised to visit, promised everything. You know how many times he's been by this year, she said, blowing on her tea. Twice. Christmas and my birthday. Both times under an hour. I didn't mean to cry, but her honesty cracked something wide open in me. I told her about the missed meds, about the lies, about the silence. That won't do at all, she said, setting her mug down with a clink. Which pharmacy? Carson's. On Main. She stood up. Get your coat. I'm taking you. I can't. Timothy has my card. You're not going another night without heart medication. Come on. I'll front the cost. I tried to protest, to pretend I still had control, but the truth was I was scared. Terrified of having another heart attack alone on my kitchen floor. Terrified no one would notice until it was too late. So I went. And that drive with Martha, it changed something, because sometimes kindness doesn't come from where you expect it. And sometimes family isn't made of blood. It's made of showing up. Martha didn't just drive me to the pharmacy that day. She gave me something I hadn't had in a long time, clarity. When we walked through those sliding doors and the pharmacist looked up, I could tell right away Timothy had never come. The medication bag I'd been waiting on, still sitting behind the counter. The pharmacist's face turned concerned the moment I explained. You can't go without these, Mrs. Winters, she said gently, especially the blood thinner and the beta blocker. I nodded, the shame rising in my chest like heat. I shouldn't have let this happen. But how do you fight for yourself when the people you love don't seem willing to lift a finger? Martha didn't miss a beat. We'll take them now, she said. And perhaps you can set her up for delivery moving forward. The pharmacist nodded. Absolutely. We have a service for that. There's a small fee. That would be helpful, I said, the words trembling out of me. It felt like surrender, but also like control. Like maybe, for the first time in years, I was making decisions for myself, not waiting for others to make them for me. When we got back to my house, Timothy's car was in the driveway. I knew that feeling in my gut, tight, sour, protective, like something old and bitter was about to replay itself. He opened the door before I could even step out. Gran, he said, holding out my credit card. The pharmacy said there was some kind of issue with your prescription. He stopped when he saw the bag in my hand. And Martha beside me. Who are you? He asked, frowning. Martha Wilson, she said crisply. Your grandmother's neighbor. I'm the one who took her to get the medication you promised to pick up yesterday. Timothy had the decency to look embarrassed. I was going to get it today, he mumbled. After she'd gone 24 hours without it, Martha asked, her voice sharp enough to slice through steel. These aren't vitamins, young man. These keep her alive. Part of me wanted to step in, to soften her words. That's what I'd always done, protected him, defended Patricia, made excuses when no one else would. But not this time. This time, I let the silence stand. Thank you for the ride. Martha, I said instead. Would you like to stay for some tea? Timothy's eyes widened. Martha, catching the moment for what it was, smiled. I'd love some tea. We walked past him, me with the medicine he failed to collect, her with the strength I didn't know I needed. He stood there, card still in his hand, speechless. That night, after Martha left, Timothy returned to the kitchen. Gran, he said, more hesitant than I'd ever seen him. I'm sorry about the medication. I really was going to get it today. I've arranged for delivery. I said, you won't have to worry about it anymore. Relief flickered across his face before he could hide it. Cool. That's probably better anyway. I looked at him carefully. Timothy, this arrangement isn't working. What? It's not just the missed meds, or being late, or the fast food instead of groceries. It's that you're not here to help. You're here because I'm paying you. His face darkened. You don't trust me. It's not about trust. It's about reliability. I need someone who shows up when promised, who takes this seriously. So you're firing me. His voice was incredulous. Your own grandson. I'm relieving you of a job you clearly don't want. I said quietly. You can keep what I've paid you. He stood there, red in the face, chest puffed like a wounded child. I've been busting my ass to help you. I tilted my head. Have you? Tell me one thing you've done properly since I came home. He opened his mouth, closed it again. You should go, I said softly. Tell your mother I'll call her tomorrow. He stormed toward the door, then turned. You've always been like this. Nothing's ever good enough for you. I didn't reply. Because maybe, finally, that was true. Maybe I was done settling for just enough. After he slammed the door, I sat in my living room, letting the quiet settle over me like a balm. Something shifted in me that night, like all the years of bending and accommodating had finally cracked apart. I wasn't angry. I was clear, and clarity is its own kind of peace. The next morning, Patricia called. Mom, she began, in that overly patient tone she reserved for difficult clients. Timothy says there was some kind of misunderstanding yesterday. No misunderstanding. I said, I've decided to hire someone else to help. That's unnecessary. Timothy is perfectly capable. He missed my rehab appointment, failed to pick up critical medication. He shows up late, or not at all. Well, he's trying his best. We all are. I paused, then said the words that had been waiting inside me for years. I just had a heart attack. Patricia, my only responsibility right now is staying alive. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. This is exactly why Timothy gets frustrated. You make everything so difficult. Is it difficult? I asked. To expect my grandson to pick up life-saving medication, or for my daughter to visit me more than twice after I nearly died. She didn't respond. And so I continued. I think those are reasonable expectations. There was a long silence. This isn't like you, she said eventually. You've never been so selfish. That word struck me, but not in the way she intended, because for the first time, I realized that maybe I should have been. Maybe, if I'd been a little more selfish years ago, stood up for myself, demanded more, required love to show up with actions, not just words, I wouldn't be having this conversation now. I need to go, she said finally. I have a showing in 20 minutes. Of course she did. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, hands folded in my lap, equal parts terrified and liberated by my own words. In 72 years, I had never spoken to my daughter like that, never challenged her assumptions, never asked her to see me not just as a mother, but as a woman with needs, limits, and the right to be treated with respect. That afternoon, Martha stopped by again. She brought groceries this time and a name, Sophia Martinez, she said, nursing student. Judith from gardening club hired her after her hip replacement. Sweet girl, responsible, knows her way around a kitchen and a pill organizer. I called Sophia that night. She answered with a warm, clear voice. We talked for 20 minutes. She was respectful, articulate, kind, and available. 3 mornings a week, starting Monday. I hung up the phone, sat back in my recliner, and closed my eyes. For the first time since the heart attack, I felt something like hope. Not because my daughter had changed, not because my grandson had learned, but because I had. I was done waiting for them to show up. I was going to show up for myself. Sophia arrived precisely at 9 Sawira Mem on Monday morning, not a minute late, not fumbling for excuses or hungover from the night before. She stood on my porch in jeans and a pale blue sweater, a tidy backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She had the clear, steady eyes of someone who noticed things and didn't need to be asked twice. Mrs. Winters, she said with a smile. I'm Sophia. I liked her immediately. Inside. She moved through my home with quiet confidence, checking my medications, taking inventory of the kitchen, noting appointments on the calendar I hadn't touched since before the heart attack. She brewed herbal tea without being asked. She didn't hover, didn't chatter to fill the silence. She simply helped. My abuela had a heart attack 2 years ago, she told me as she organized my pills into a weekly sorter. I helped take care of her while I was in nursing school. That's actually why I chose cardiology as my specialty. That explained the tenderness in her movements, the practiced hands, the way she checked my vitals without making me feel like a patient. She wasn't just doing a job. She understood what it meant to recover slowly, stubbornly, with dignity. By Wednesday, my house looked different, not pristine, just lived in, cared for. The laundry was folded, the floors swept, The counters no longer held empty cups and unopened mail. She refilled my bird feeders without being told. She even watered the hydrangeas, her touch gentle as she pressed her fingers into the soil. "They need a bit more acid," she said casually, crouching near the flower bed. "That's why they're fading toward pink. If you want them deep blue again, I can pick up some amendments at the garden center." I blinked at her. "You know gardening. My mother runs a nursery," she replied, smiling. I grew up with dirt under my fingernails. For a moment, I just watched her. This young woman, neither family nor friend, just days ago was now kneeling beside my flowers with more reverence and care than my own daughter or grandson had ever shown. That afternoon, Martha came by for tea. She'd made it a ritual by then, one I looked forward to more than I'd expected. We sat by the kitchen window, sipping chamomile and watching the sparrows pick at the newly filled feeders. I told her about Robert's visit, about how he hadn't come out of concern but out of calculation. "So it's about the money," she said bluntly, setting down her mug. I suspected as much. He didn't say it outright, I admitted, but the implication was clear. "They're worried about what you're spending." Martha snorted. "Not what that spending gives you in return." Her words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they were true. How many times had I opened my wallet for Patricia and Robert over the years? The down payment on their first house, private school for Timothy, bailing out Robert after his last surefire investment collapsed, always with the unspoken understanding that family helped family. But now that the help flowed in reverse, they called it wasteful. "You know," Martha said thoughtfully. "The senior center has a gardening club, meets Thursdays, and a book group on Tuesdays. Sophia could drive you." I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready to socialize." "Nonsense," she said, standing to rinse her cup. "Sitting in this house isn't recovery, it's retreat. I'm picking you up Thursday at 9. No excuses." I opened my mouth to protest, but stopped. Why was I hesitating? Because it meant acknowledging that I needed community beyond my family, that maybe my old life centered around being a mother, a grandmother, a fixer wasn't coming back, that maybe it was time to build something different. "All right," I said softly. Thursday at 9. The gardening club met in a bright room at the Maple Grove Senior Center. A dozen women sat around folding tables, chatting over seed catalogs and clippings. Martha introduced me to everyone: Judith, Georgia. Elaine and I was welcomed with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It turned out I wasn't alone. These women had their own stories, their own scars. "My son only visits when he needs money," Georgia said, her hands deftly repotting a succulent. "Didn't even notice when I stopped answering his calls for 2 weeks." My daughter was horrified when I went on a cruise after her father died. Elaine chimed in, said I was spending her inheritance. I told her her inheritance was the 20 years I spent raising her. Laughter rippled through the room, and for the first time in weeks, I laughed with them. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Not because anything had been fixed, but because I didn't have to explain myself. They just knew. Later that week, I got a package in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting, Patricia's. Inside was a glossy brochure for a retirement village, Sunrise Village, along with a note from the director: "Your daughter expressed interest in your future with us." I stood at the counter, the paper trembling in my hand. They were making plans. For me, without me. I shredded the brochure and used it as mulch for my new rose bushes. That night, I called Patricia. "Don't contact them again on my behalf," I said. She bristled. "Mom, We were just thinking about your safety." "My safety," I replied, "has improved dramatically since I stopped depending on people who didn't show up when I needed them." A long pause. "Are you threatening to cut me off?" "No," I said. "I'm establishing a boundary, something I should have done years ago. It was the first time I didn't flinch from her disappointment, because here's what I knew now. I wasn't her retirement plan. I wasn't Timothy's backup bank. I wasn't Robert's property to manage. I was me, Claire Winters, widow, gardener, survivor, and for the first time in decades, I was finally blooming again, not for anyone else's benefit, but on my own terms. The days began to follow a new rhythm. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Sophia would arrive like clockwork calm, focused, gentle. We'd go through the day's checklist medications, meals, stretches, appointments. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Martha would swing by in her sensible sedan, ready to whisk me off to book club or gardening meetings at the senior center, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to feel like someone again, not just a heart patient, not a burden, not a faded woman waiting to be moved someplace more appropriate, as Robert so graciously put it during one of his brief, booming phone calls. No, here, among the women at the center, I felt something I hadn't in years, visible. Judith taught me how to propagate cuttings from my hydrangeas. Georgia loaned me a stack of mystery novels with bookmarks already in place. Elaine showed me how to use the computers at the center to browse gardening blogs and even order specialty soil amendments online. For the first time in my life, I created a digital password and actually remembered it. They became more than friends. They became witnesses to the version of me that had been buried under decades of caretaking, obligation, and quiet sacrifice. 1 month after my heart attack, I received a thick envelope in the mail. The return address read Sunrise Village Retirement Community. Inside was a brochure again, a glossy, floral-scented promise of easy living, no maintenance homes, and on-site dining. But this time, there was also paperwork, an application. With my name already typed in, I didn't need to ask. I knew who had sent it. The presumption stung more than the heart attack ever did. I hadn't even been asked, just scheduled, slotted into someone else's idea of convenience. I tore the papers into strips and used them as mulch around the base of my rose bushes. Then I picked up the phone. Patricia answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was tight, as if she already knew what was coming. "I got the Sunrise Village package," I said. "Don't contact them again on my behalf." "Mom," she sighed, "I was just trying to help." "No," I said. "You were trying to remove a responsibility you never intended to carry. That's not help. That's control." A long pause. "Are you cutting me off? I'm setting a boundary," I replied calmly. "If you'd like to talk about how we can have a relationship that doesn't revolve around guilt or money or real estate, I'm open to that. But I'm not selling my home. And I'm not moving. Period." Silence. Then, "This isn't like you." She said that a lot lately. But maybe this was exactly who I'd always been, only now. I wasn't hiding it anymore. I hung up, my hands shaking, equal parts fear and freedom running through me. That evening, I sat on my new garden bench, installed by Sophia's brother, a polite young man who showed up when he said he would, and watched the sun set behind the maple tree. The flower beds were starting to recover. The weeds were pulled, the soil nourished. My hydrangeas, once sagging with neglect, stood proud and full. The bird feeders were a flutter of wings and chatter. Even the squirrels had returned, bickering under the oak like old men on a porch. It struck me then that I was tending two gardens now, one of soil and one of self. Both had suffered from long neglect. Both were finally blooming. The next Tuesday, as Sophia helped me into the car for book club, Patricia pulled into the driveway unannounced. She stepped out of her sleek BMW, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and looked at me as though seeing a stranger. "You're going out," she asked. "To the senior center," I replied. "We're discussing Agatha Christie today." Her eyes flicked to Sophia, then back to me. "I was hoping we could talk. Privately. I have a commitment." I said, "We can talk when I get back, or you're welcome to join us." She looked unsure, but to my surprise, she followed us. At the center, she sat stiffly, clearly out of place among the folding chairs and paper cups of lukewarm coffee. But she stayed, listened, even laughed once or twice at Elaine's sharp wit. When it was over, and the others filtered out with hugs and promises to call, Patricia remained seated beside me. "So this is your life now?" she asked. I nodded. "This is part of it." She looked at me for a long moment. "You seem different." "I am," I said simply. I nearly died. Patricia. And in that moment, all I could think about was how I had given everything to everyone except myself. She didn't speak, just looked at her hands. "I didn't mean for things to get so distant," she said finally. "I didn't realize how much you were doing on your own." "That's the thing," I replied. "You didn't ask, and I didn't tell, because I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not," she said quickly. "I was," I said gently, "but only because I allowed it. That's on me, but I won't do it anymore." We sat in silence for a while, not mother and daughter, but two women finally confronting the space that had grown between them. "If I wanted to try again," she said quietly, "to have a relationship that wasn't transactional, would that be possible?" I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, and I saw her not as the woman who had disappointed me or the child who had once clung to my leg, but as a person trying to grow. "I'd like that." I said. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Then we can learn together." And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I'd thought I'd lost hope. Not the naive kind that waits for others to change, but the strong, quiet kind that says I've changed, and I'm not going back. It started with a knock, not the sharp, business-like rap of a delivery driver, not the familiar tap-tap of Martha, come bearing tea and gossip. This knock was hesitant, almost sheepish. When I opened the door, Timothy was standing there. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed. He held a fast food bag in one hand and a bottle of soda in the other. "Hey, Gran," he muttered, not quite meeting my eyes. I stepped aside, said nothing. He entered like a shadow, tossed the food on the counter, flopped onto my couch, and kicked off his shoes like it hadn't been almost 2 weeks since our last confrontation, like he hadn't failed to answer my calls, like he hadn't left me, a recovering heart attack patient, to fend for myself while he disappeared into whatever foggy chaos he'd chosen over responsibility. "I brought lunch," he said, opening a burger wrapper with one hand, the other still on his phone. I sat across from him. "Timothy," I said quietly, "I thought we agreed this arrangement wasn't working." He shrugged. "I figured maybe we could try again. Mom said you were still mad." Mad. That word felt so small. I wasn't mad. I was done. I stared at him for a long moment, his jaw still boyish, his hands still twitchy with restless energy. But the boy who used to pick wildflowers for me after school, the one who cried when a goldfish died, that child was gone. I've hired someone. I said, Sophia. She's been helping me 3 days a week. His chewing slowed. You replaced me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence do what words couldn't. You don't trust me, he said, pushing the fries aside. That's it. Isn't it no? I replied, I don't rely on people who consistently let me down. That's different. He flinched. And for a moment, I almost took it back, almost filled the silence with softness, with apologies. That old habit of rescuing others from the consequences of their own actions still tugged at the edges of me, but I didn't take it back, because truth, when buried too long, rots, and I was done living among decay. He stood up, anger rising behind his tired eyes. So what? I'm just supposed to disappear. You're cutting me out. I stood too, slowly, deliberately. You're not a child. Timothy, you made choices. Now I'm making mine. He stormed out without another word. And for once, I let the door close behind him without chasing after it. That evening, I called Martha. She listened quietly as I told her everything. Let him sit in it, she said finally. He's a grown man. You've given him everything. Time, money, patience. Now give him the gift of accountability. I laughed, though my throat tightened. You make it sound so poetic. Truth often is, she said. That weekend, she invited me to a dinner party at Judith's house. Nothing fancy, just the women from gardening club and their spouses. I was hesitant at first. It had been a long time since I'd worn real clothes that weren't for doctor's appointments or recovery. But I went, and something remarkable happened. I laughed. Not the polite chuckle I'd become accustomed to, but the kind of laugh that starts deep in your belly and surprises you with its fullness. The kind that reminds you you're still alive, not just surviving, but living. After dinner, Elaine pulled me aside. You've got that glow, she said, raising an eyebrow. Looks good on you. It's just the lighting, I replied modestly. She smirked. Or maybe it's what happens when you finally stop watering dead plants. Her words echoed in my mind long after I got home, because that's what I'd been doing. Hadn't I pouring love, time, and money into people who refused to grow, hoping, praying, begging for them to bloom when they had no intention of changing? Sophia arrived Monday morning with fresh groceries and a new pot of basil. I thought this would do well in your kitchen window, she said. And it did, just like she did. By Friday, she had taught me how to schedule my own online pharmacy deliveries, signed me up for a local lecture series at the community college, and installed a new birdhouse in the maple tree outside. You're thriving, she said one afternoon, handing me my afternoon tea. I am, I admitted, but I wasn't the only one watching my garden flourish. Patricia called that Saturday. I've been thinking, she said, her tone cautious. Maybe we could have lunch, just us. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near the lake. She arrived in a crisp blazer, but her face looked softer, more tired, more real. I'm sorry, she said, once we sat, for the way I handled everything after your heart attack, for not being there. I stirred my tea. I let it go on for too long. I trained you to think I didn't need anything. She nodded. I think. We both forgot you were a person first, before a mother, before a grandmother. I forgot too, I said. We sat in the quiet for a while. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. You won't, I promised, but you might have to get to know me again. The real me, not the one who always says yes. I'd like that. And for once, I believed her. 2 weeks later, I hosted a small garden party. Just tea and cookies. Sophia was there. Martha, of course. Judith, Georgia, Elaine, even Patricia stopped by. She brought a lemon tart and sat awkwardly on the edge of a lawn chair, but she stayed. She listened. She watched the way these women laughed with me, helped me prune roses, asked how I was really doing, and something shifted in her. She saw, maybe for the first time, that I had a life, a full one. Without her at the center, later, as she was leaving, she touched my hand. You're happy, she said softly. I'm becoming, I replied. She smiled. That's better than happy. And she was right, because happiness is fleeting, but becoming is a journey. It's what happens when you stop waiting for permission to bloom, when you rip out the weeds of guilt and plant boundaries like hedges, when you say no and mean it, when you say yes and it's for you. That night, I sat under the stars, the garden bathed in moonlight. The hydrangeas were deeper blue now, thanks to the acid Sophia had added to the soil. The roses had begun to climb the trellis. The basil thrived in the kitchen. And I was no longer someone's mother, no longer just a wife who had once been left behind, no longer just a name on hospital paperwork. I was Claire Winters, woman, survivor, and finally in full bloom. It's strange how life reorders itself when you stop begging others to help carry the weight. In the weeks following that garden party, my home became more than a house again. It became a haven, one nurtured not just by hands, but by intention. Sophia still came 3 days a week, bright and warm and endlessly competent. She'd bring flowers from her mother's nursery, new herbs for my windowsill, and stories from nursing school that reminded me of my own early years when I still believed in reinvention. Martha visited almost daily now, sometimes with cookies, sometimes just with company. And between book club, gardening group, and weekend walks with Elaine around Maple Grove, my calendar filled in a way it hadn't in years. I wasn't waiting anymore for phone calls that didn't come, visits that were always postponed, help that only arrived with resentment. I was choosing, and that small shift made all the difference. One Wednesday afternoon, I came inside from trimming back the hydrangeas to find the answering machine blinking. 3 messages. The first was from Timothy. In his usual half-hearted tone, Gran, Mom says I should apologize. So sorry. Or whatever. Call me if you want. I didn't. The second was from Patricia Mom. This silent treatment is childish. We need to talk about your care plan like adults. Call me. I didn't do that either. But the third message made me pause. Claire, this is Robert. I spoke to our financial advisor about your situation. There are some options we should discuss: reverse mortgage, that sort of thing. Give me a call. A reverse mortgage. That's what it had come to. They saw the house not as my home, but as an asset to be unlocked. A pile of bricks and equity they were itching to redistribute. I deleted all 3 messages. Then, I called Sophia and asked if she could take me to the garden center the next morning. I wanted soil amendments and a few new perennials for the front beds. Of course, she said cheerfully. I'll bring gloves. We can plant them together. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and a blanket across my knees, watching twilight soften the edges of my garden. The bird feeders were full. The fountain Martha's son had helped repair burbled gently. And beneath the soft porch light, I could see the fresh buds beginning to form on the climbing roses. They were taking root again, just like me. That Friday, Patricia showed up unannounced. Sophia and I were getting ready to leave for the senior center. Patricia parked her car in my driveway and stood there for a moment, arms crossed, taking in the scene. "You're going out?" she asked, as if it were a surprise. "We have book club this morning," I said. "They're discussing, and then there were none. Should be lively. I was hoping to talk." She said, "Privately, I have a commitment." I replied, "You're welcome to join us, or we can talk when I return." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but she followed. At the center, I introduced her to the ladies, Judith with her witty one-liners, Georgia, who brought lemon bars, Elaine with her encyclopedic memory of every Agatha Christie plot twist. Patricia sat stiffly at first, her corporate polish standing out in our room full of knit cardigans and comfort shoes. But she stayed, and something in her softened. By the time we returned home, she was quieter. "They're nice," she said, as we walked back up the front path. "They're my friends," I replied. "They've shown up for me more in the past month than most of my family has in years." She didn't argue. Inside, over tea, she finally said it. "I know I haven't been great, Mom." I didn't interrupt. "I think I've just always assumed you'd be there, that you were solid, unshakable, and I never thought about what you needed." I stared into my cup. "Because I never told you." She looked at me, really looked. "I want to do better." "I believe you mean that," I said. "But meaning it and doing it are two very different things." She nodded slowly. "Where do we start?" I thought for a moment. "We start with honesty," I said, "and respect. You don't have to take care of me. I've arranged what I need, but if we're going to have a relationship, it can't be built on guilt, obligation, or managing my affairs behind my back." "I understand," she said. And for the first time, I believed her. Later that evening, as Sophia helped me prepare a simple supper, she said, "You were brave today." I smiled. Brave feels more like tired with boundaries. She laughed. "That's still brave." The next week passed gently. Sophia brought over photos of her niece. Martha dropped off fresh apples and suggested we try baking together soon. Georgia invited me to her church's fall festival. Even Timothy sent a text, just one word, "Hi." I didn't reply. Some bridges need rebuilding. Others need to be left alone so the forest can grow over them. By month's end, I hosted another garden party. The hydrangeas had recovered beautifully. The new perennials were thriving. The birds were back in full chorus. Martha brought wine. Elaine made her famous deviled eggs. Patricia came, this time with a store-bought pie and a willingness to sit among the folding chairs and actually listen. She stayed longer than usual, helped wash dishes, even offered to join me at the senior center's Thursday craft fair. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood in my garden and looked around. It wasn't the family I'd once imagined. It was the family I'd chosen. Women who showed up, a caregiver who honored my dignity, a daughter finally seeing her mother as a whole person, and a home that no longer felt like a cage, but a sanctuary. I leaned down and brushed my fingers over the soft petals of the nearest hydrangea. They were a deeper blue than ever bold, thriving, unapologetic. And so was I. At 72, I was finally living a life not defined by what I'd given away, but by what I was choosing to keep. My peace, my garden, my voice, and I would never hand any of that over again. A few weeks after the second garden party, something unexpected happened. My phone rang. Not a telemarketer, not the pharmacy, not Martha or Sophia. It was Patricia. She sounded different, less clipped, less composed. There was something raw in her voice, something I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "I need to ask you something," she began, "and I want you to say no if it's not something you want." I held my breath. "Robert and I are taking a trip next month," she continued. "A cruise, actually, with some of his partners and their wives. It's important for his career. And, well, the timing isn't great. I could already hear it coming. Timothy's not able to house sit," she said, "and we don't want to board Pepper. You remember Pepper, right? Our Labradoodle." Of course I remembered. They'd brought the dog to Thanksgiving once, uninvited, and he'd spent the whole afternoon jumping on my couch and eating half of the sweet potato casserole off the counter. "You're asking if I'll watch your dog?" I asked slowly. "Just for 10 days, she said quickly. "You wouldn't have to do much. He's house-trained now. I'd bring his food. He's used to being indoors." I didn't answer right away, because the woman on the other end of the line wasn't the same one who had watched me struggle through recovery with little more than surface-level concern. This version sounded tired, maybe even a little regretful, but also unaware of what it meant to ask someone she had once all but abandoned to now care for her pet, just so she could sail away into tropical sunsets with a husband who'd never once lifted a finger for me. "I'm sorry, Patricia," I said finally, "but no, I won't watch Pepper." There was a long pause. "Oh," she said, not angry, just surprised. "I hope you understand." I added, "It's not about the dog. It's about everything that's come before him." Another pause. "Then I get it. I do." I wasn't sure she did, but she was trying. That had to count for something. 2 days later, Sophia arrived with a bright smile and a glossy brochure. "I saw this and thought of you," she said. It was for a wellness retreat, a small, quiet coastal resort that specialized in holistic recovery programs for seniors' gentle yoga, gardening classes, sea air, and a whole lot of doing absolutely nothing if you didn't feel like it. 4 days by the ocean, she said, flipping it open. They even have a botanical therapy workshop. You'd love it. I stared at the photos' sandy paths, hammocks under palm trees, weathered wood cottages surrounded by wildflowers. "Do people go alone?" I asked. "Absolutely. Most of their guests are widowed or single. Some go just to get away from their grown kids." We both laughed. I hadn't taken a real trip in over 30 years, not since Henry died, not since I became everyone else's backup plan. I ran my fingers over the pages, felt the pull of something I hadn't allowed myself to want in a very long time. "You think it's silly for someone my age to go to something like this?" I asked. Sophia shook her head. "I think it's long overdue." And so I booked it. 4 nights, 5 days, a modest cabin near the dunes. No TV, no emails, no obligations. Just me, a suitcase, and a heart that was still learning how to beat for itself again. The moment the taxi dropped me at the retreat's front gate, I felt something release inside me. Not fear, not worry, but space. Space to exhale. The days passed like a gentle tide. Morning tea with fresh lemon, a walk by the water, seashells crunching underfoot. In the afternoons, I sat under a wide umbrella and journaled, or joined a few of the others for soft conversation and quiet laughter. Nobody knew me as Patricia's mom or Timothy's grandma or the widow on Maple Lane. I was Claire, just Claire, a woman with laugh lines and stories, with deep aches and deeper hope. One evening, I joined a small class on restorative gardening out near the greenhouse. We planted succulents in mismatched clay pots, our hands covered in soil as the instructor talked about root systems and how plants recover better when repotted into containers that suit their true size. I looked down at the tiny jade plant in my hand, and I realized that was me. I'd been cramped for years, crushed under expectations that didn't fit, tended by hands that didn't care, root-bound in a life that had stopped being mine. But here, I was repotting, starting fresh. On the last morning of the retreat, I stood on the beach and watched the sunrise. The sky rippled with coral and gold. The waves moved slow and certain. A sandpiper danced near my feet. I closed my eyes and let the wind move through me. And for the first time since the heart attack, since the hospital bed, since the begging and the silence and the lies, I felt whole. When I returned home, the house greeted me like an old friend. The garden was thriving, thanks to Sophia and her brother. The bird feeders full. A small bouquet waited on the kitchen counter with a note, "Welcome home. The garden missed you. So did we." Sophia and Martha. The phone rang that evening. It was Patricia again. "Mom," she said, I wanted to thank you for being honest with me, for saying no." I sat down at the kitchen table, touched by the sincerity in her voice. "We found someone to watch Pepper. It all worked out. But it made me think how often I've asked you to do something because I expected you to, not because you wanted to." I stayed quiet. "Let her speak. I want to get better at that," she said. "At seeing you, not just needing you." "Thank you," I said gently. "I'm glad you took that trip." She added, "You sound lighter." "I am." I said, "I really am. Because sometimes the best way to heal isn't to chase down old wounds, but to step away from them, to repot your roots, to tend your own garden, to book a seat by the sea and remember you were never too old to begin again." On my first morning, back from the retreat, I stood at the kitchen window with a fresh cup of tea and watched the sunlight spill across my garden. The roses had opened, delicate and wide like they'd been waiting for me. Sophia's note still sat on the counter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no rush, no pressure, no obligation. Later that afternoon, Timothy called. His voice was quieter than usual, not sulking, not demanding. "Gran, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I didn't realize how much I took you for granted. I didn't rush to forgive him. I simply listened, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone isn't another second chance. It's space to recognize their own failings. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can give yourself is permission to stop being needed and start being known." That day, I didn't just tend to my garden, I tended to myself. And I realized I wasn't healing for anyone else. I was healing for me. Life has a way of teaching us, often the hard way, that love without respect feels hollow. That being needed is not the same as being valued, and that sometimes the most loving act you can offer is simply to say, "No more." To anyone listening who's poured themselves out for years, waiting for gratitude that never came, know this: you are allowed to put yourself first, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. If this story touched you, share your own journey in the comments below. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? How did it change you? And if you're finding strength in stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes one voice speaking truth is all it takes to help another find their own.